So tonight we're going to spend about 15 minutes, 20 minutes talking more on the Great Commission. Specifically, when does this speech take place? Alright, so if you were here last week, we looked at where this speech takes place, which is in Bethany, a poor suburb southeast of the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. We also, the week before, looked at the audience, who this speech is for. So we've looked at those things. So this time we're going to take a deeper look at when this speech takes place. I believe that without this speech, we don't have Christianity. That's how important I put an emphasis on the Great Commission. It is the last speech Jesus gave right before he did this massive disappearing act in front of about 500 people. So, and it's right in the speech itself. Go into all the world. So without this speech, we do not have evangelism, we do not have missionaries, we don't have any of that spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In other words, we don't have Christianity. And so let's look at that time frame here. So again, a recap. Bethany is a city in Judea, which is in the Roman Empire. And most of the people who were on this hillside were Jews. So if you hear some dings, I forgot to turn off notifications. So this speech takes place circa 33 AD. For those of you who aren't aware, AD and BCE mean essentially the same thing. They have the same numbering system of years. BCE is or CE, sorry, not BCE, but CE, which is Common Era, and AD means Anno Domini, which is Latin for Year of Our Lord. So, but they have the same start point and the same years. So if it is 2019 AD, it's also 2019 CE. So just for those of you out there who use the other numbering system. So this speech, like I mentioned, is the last speech Jesus gives right before disappearing in front of their very eyes. Leading up to this speech is interesting. We don't have any speeches of Jesus between the Last Supper and the Great Commission. So the Last Supper happens, then Jesus betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, and we have the trial, we have the crucifixion. I am in no way, shape, or form an expert on Roman crucifixions, so I'm not going to even get into crucifixion. But then we have him, the burial, the resurrection. There's 40 days from there until the Great Commission. There's different things that happen. Jesus is seen by people all the way in Emmaus, which is northeast or northwest of Jerusalem. Leading up to this place, it's interesting that this would take place in Bethany because Jesus starts his ministry talking about taking care of the poor. We have Beatitudes. Blessed is the poor in spirit. Blessed is those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. You can see that in Matthew 5. At the end of this, he's also in Bethany, which means city of sorrow or city of sickness. There's a famous hospital in Bethany. There was a lot of poor and sick people in Bethany. The wealthy did not go to Bethany. And there's some famous people that you may have heard of in Bethany. That would be Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, his sisters, among others. So check out that video last week on more on that. So back to time. So we have 40 days from the resurrection until the speech known as the Great Commission, which is recorded by 3 of the biographers. So in this 40-day period, lots of people, just tons of people, are like, oh, wow, he's alive. How is he alive? We watched them kill him. So about 500 of these followers, these disciples, it's not just the 11 disciples that remained, because Judas did kill himself 40 days earlier. It's about 500 disciples and people from that area on this hillside. And quite frankly, one of those disciples asked Jesus, hey, is it time to overthrow Rome yet? Are we going to reestablish the kingdom of Israel? And this speech is a response to that, which is pretty interesting. So that's what's going on the local level. On the local level, right there in Bethany, in the greater Jerusalem area, there's a manhunt going on by the Roman soldiers. They're trying to hunt down Jesus. They're trying to hunt down anybody who knows of him or his whereabouts. They are trying to put an end to this rabbi that talks some crazy stuff about, coming back to life and starting a new kingdom. And Pontius Pilate sends out this order to find out what's going on and to squash any rebellion. So let's zoom out. So we're talking about right there in Bethany and Jerusalem. Now let's zoom out to Judea and Samaria, because they're both being governed by Pontius Pilate, by the Romans. And at this time, the Jews have done some calendar calculations and figured out, oh, hey, the Messiah, our Savior, the one who's going to liberate us from Rome and rule and reestablish this Jewish kingdom, like David's kingdom. If you're a Jew, David's like way up there. And they've done these calculations, and they're looking for this manly man to lead and give Rome the big old boot right in the keister. That's what's going on in that area. Now, there was extra security at Passover. Passover is a massive holiday, even today in Jewish communities. Passover is the holiday of the year. It celebrates the Jews being liberated from Egypt way back in the Exodus, and every year it's celebrated. It's a massive festival about freedom. Cannot stress that enough. Passover is about being free. It's like Independence Day, except they're not independent. They're celebrating an Independence Day celebration, but they're under Roman rule. So that creates conflict and friction. And it's creating conflict and friction with the Romans. It's creating conflict and friction with the surrounding communities and the non-Jewish people. There is a powder keg brewing in Jerusalem and Judea, and even all the way into Samaria and Syria. So in that broader area and region of the Roman Empire, so much so that Rome has sent legions, literally legions. A legion is over 1,000 soldiers to this area of the empire to squash any rebellion or any hint of rebellion. There's been some recent rebellions, like the Maccabees being the largest one, but even more recent than that, there was this guy named Barabbas. A lot of historians believe his first name was Yeshua, which is the same first name as Jesus in the Hebrew. And the reason he's called Barabbas is because Barabbas means son of rabbi, but he was known as a rebel leader. He had incited a rebellion and been caught, and he was supposed to be executed. So there is rumors of rebellion. There are rebellions. There's some minor skirmishes between the Jewish people and the Roman authorities going on a regular basis at this period in time. It is a relatively peaceful time, but there's these outbursts over here and this little spark over here, which is pretty interesting because it creates this bubble atmosphere going on with the Jews. So Jesus shows up during this time period and just completely transforms the thought process. He says the greatest commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind, with all your soul, and everything you are. And the second commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. And since you love yourself enough to bathe, you love yourself enough to put clothes on and eat, you should also be doing that for your neighbor. And when asked who his neighbor was, he said, everyone. Everyone is your neighbor. The least to the greatest. Everyone. And that was revolutionary thought and created this massive powder keg that 40 days earlier at Passover, that's why Jesus is arrested. That's why the Romans arrest him. That's why the Sanhedrin court convened on that day and wanted to kill him. And that's why the Romans wanted to put an end to this mess. So we have this speech of Jesus telling these 500 people, go into Jerusalem. In other words, it's about 1.5 mile walk, guys. Go into Jerusalem, into this powder keg of conflict, and tell them everything I've taught you. Teach them everything I've taught you. Be peaceful, peaceable, be consistent, be compassionate, be honest, be true. He's telling them to go into this powder keg of conflict, Jerusalem, and teach them to be disciples and to study and to learn and become like him, Christian, or to become like Christ in this speech. And then he also says, but don't stop in Jerusalem. Go into all of Judea, which is the Roman province that used to be Judah. That's actually where the term, the name Judea comes from. It comes from the ancient title of Judah. And then he says, go into Samaria, which is, the Samaritans were hated by Jews. They were absolutely hated by Jews. So much so that there was a part of Judea, and the southern part of Judea and the northern part of Judea, and Samaria kind of bifurcated them. They would walk all the way around Samaria to get to the top, just so they didn't have to walk through Samaria and happen to meet a Samaritan. That's how much they despised each other. And Jesus says, go into Samaria and teach them too. And then he tells them, and when you're done there, go into all of the world. And that's what we see in Acts of the Apostles going on, and we even see it still today. So that's why this speech is so impactful, is because it's such a dichotomy of thought. It's so unconventional to anything else going on in the world at that time and the world now. So that was going on in the Roman Empire. If you know what's going on around 33 AD in the Roman Empire, it's not the most peaceful time. There's very few times in the Roman Empire where there's peace and prosperity, just FYI. But there's some changing of the guard and some advancements going on. We know if we fast forward just shy of 40 years, 37 years in the future, to 70 AD, there's a massive rebellion. It's horrible to be a Jew at that period of time because the Romans are not taking prisoners. They just slaughter everybody they come in contact with. It's horrible. If you want to come up with a horror movie, the Siege of Jerusalem, 70 AD, yeah, that's kind of, but yeah, that's bad. Okay, so Jesus marks what's going on before and what's going on after. So prior to Jesus, each civilization, each major power counted their own years. So they had their own calendars and they counted their own years. So, for example, you can see this in the Old Testament. throughout the First and Second Chronicles, First, Second Kings, where it's even in the minor prophets, major and minor prophets, it says, like one of them says something to the effect of, in the fifth year of King Cyrus of Babylon, blah 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 happened. In the 9th year of King Hezekiah of Judah, blah 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 happens, or that kind of thing. That's how years were counted. Even in the Roman calendar, which was the empire of the day, they counted the number of years from when legend had it that Romulus and Rommel founded Rome. But that all changes with this guy named Jesus. He never fought a war. He may or may not have even owned a sword, but that's debatable. I personally don't think he did own a sword. I do think his disciples did, because he flat out asks them at one point in time, how many swords do we have? And I think it was Peter answered, we've got a few. And he says, yeah, that will be enough. In my research for this particular video, I couldn't remember what AD meant. I was told numerous times that AD stood for after death. It doesn't. It's Anno Domini. Anno Domini, which is Latin for in the year of the Lord. The Lord being Jesus, by the way. For those of you who are not of the Christian faith, the Lord refers to Jesus. The first individual credited with using this numbering system was the Venerable Bede in Ecclesiastical History of the English People, AD 731. He popularized the AD BC. However, the BC before Christ didn't appear until later half of the 17th century. So prior to that, the Christian church at the time, which was growing in popularity, this is after the Council of Nicaea, this is after Constantine's conversion, it's after several councils. We have almost the entire Bible, if not the entire 66 Bibles collected and being used at this point in time. It's well into, Christianity is definitely far from its infancy at this point. But they're using a numbering system for years going off of Diocletian, which was a Roman Empire. You should look into him, especially if you don't like Christians. Look into Diocletian, because he wasn't a nice guy. Okay? So every time they wrote a year down, they were reminded of this Emperor Diocletian. He definitely was not a fan of Christians. He tortured them. He literally fed them to lions in Colosseums in front of live audiences. Talk about brutal. Okay. So at this point, the Venerable Bede, he's credited with being the first one to really use this AD system. And he wasn't very far off. He dated it from when he thought Jesus was born. However, modern historians agree that Jesus was born between 4 and 6 AD. So he was pretty close, given this was in 731 AD. I mean, that's 7 centuries after the resurrection, crucifixion, resurrection, and definitely, quite a while before now. So, and there are only 2 countries in the world that I know of that do not use this numbering system for years. Both of them recognize this numbering system, but they do not use it officially. And that is China. The Chinese use the Chinese calendar, which has a different numbering of years. I believe it's from the founding of China. And the Jews, so Israel. Israel uses a 2-year numbering system. They use the AD BC numbering system, and they also use the Jewish calendar numbering system, which dates back to the Exodus of Egypt, Passover, which was a start point for them, and has continued to be since. It's like 5,800 something. So if you know what the Jewish year is this year, number, let me know. Give me a comment. If you don't, that's fine. I could look it up, but I'm not going to. So we're at 21 minutes right now, so we're going to wrap this up for this week. And just remember, without the Great Commission, the disciples of Jesus would have no incentive to change the local world and thus change the entire course of human history. The Great Commission is the speech that propels Christians to go and to teach and to baptize and to commission others in this thing we call Christianity. To love our neighbors as ourselves, to worship God, to love God, and to give our all. You don't have to take my word for any of this. If you're watching this, you clearly have internet access and a whole slew of references available at your fingertips. I might even be able to pull that up here. But yeah, I don't know if I can pull it up real quick. And it's been about 15 minutes, so we're going to start wrapping up here. Sorry, my phone notified me of something. I should turn those off. Also, you can check out this entire series on the Great Commission on 90 and Out on YouTube. So just in the search bar, go 90 and Out, Timothy Holt, and it'll come up. If you can hear me, if we've got good picture, please send me a message. If it looks like I'm looking over or past the camera, it's because I have some notes on the computer screen behind the camera, and I'll be looking periodically at it. So, scoot back here a little bit, so a little bit better focus with the screen. So feel free to give me a wave in the comments or however that works.